And welcome back to Capitol Tonight. Well, of the 10 newly elected members of the state Senate, my next guest is one of the more recognizable. His successful primary challenge to outgoing Senate Majority Leader Pedro Espada Jr. in September became a cause célèbre for champions of government reform. And then he stumped statewide in hopes of helping other fellow Democrats to duplicate his experience in the general election. That effort met with mixed results. Gustavo Rivera joins us in the studio tonight. Senator-elect, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So you tried, you gave it sort of your all, and it worked somewhat. You were all over the state, and you came close, but it's unclear who's going to be in power come January.
We did have a couple of very good successes. I think that down in Queens, defeating Frank Padovan with newly Senator-elect Tony Avella, I think that was a good thing. And I also think that David Carlucci in the 38th district and that open seat, that was a fantastic win. So I'm very happy about those two and working along with them with my new colleagues in January.
You are here for orientation, and it's got to be a strange situation because how do you tell people, okay, well, you should prepare for this staffing level and you should prepare for these offices when you're actually not sure who's going to have what? Well,
I think there's a lot of stuff that we have to learn. I mean, I worked in the state Senate for a few years, and I was chief of staff
for Andrew Stewart
Cousins when she became a senator. So I have a pretty good idea from the staffing perspective. I think that one of the things that we're going to be talking about today is, for example, everything having to do with the budget. I actually want to get in there and learn how this actually works. I've only known it from a staffing level, and I haven't really gotten into the depth that I'm going to have to. So I think that those are the things that we're going to deal with today. What is the procedure on the state Senate floor? You know, for the folks that have not been in the Capitol before, where the bathroom is,
right.
things of that nature.
That is a very important issue.
Yes,
actually.
absolutely.
Right.
And overall, just learning about some of the legislating that we're going to have to do. Regardless of where we end up.
You know, you're a progressive guy. I mean, you ran with the Working Families Party support, very strong. They actually spent a lot of money on the race. As I mentioned, you became sort of a real cause for the Democrats to demonstrate, now this is pre-AEG, which we can get to in a second, but that they actually really believed in reform and thought that government reform was a good thing in changing Albany, et cetera. You became that guy because you ousted Pedro Espada, who, of course, has been sued by Andrew Cuomo for alleged wrong deeds, with corruption, et cetera. We won't get into it. Do you think, going forward, as a progressive, are you concerned about the budget that Andrew Cuomo is going to be probably putting out as his first executive proposal? Because it's going to be quite painful. It's going to cut a lot of programs and a lot of probably nonprofit, education, healthcare, things that generally are favored by Democrats.
Well, we certainly didn't, I certainly didn't come to Albany expecting that everything was going to be pretty and beautiful and certainly not easy. So I think that this first year is definitely going to be difficult for us. I'm looking forward to working with the governor on governing and particularly on the budget process. Now, I agree with the governor on many things. I don't agree with him on everything. And as a progressive, there's certain things that I'm definitely going to stand for. I think that there's a few things that we need to do in the process before we get to the cuts. I know that most of the money that is spent in the state is spent on education and healthcare. But I do believe that there are things that we can do before we get to the cuts. And in particular, I think that we need to start talking about progressive taxation. I believe in that, and I'm going to fight for that.
Well, that's taxing the rich is what you're talking about,
That is correct.
Right?
I believe that wealthier New Yorkers need to pay their fair share. I also think that we need to close loopholes in corporate tax structure, as well as look at very closely, and this is something that I do agree with the governor on, in looking at authorities and agencies all across the state and see how we could potentially make them work more efficiently, making sure that we have the least impact on the frontline workers, maybe look at the management structure. But overall, these are two things that happen before we get to talking about cuts. So when these things I will advocate for, so we can make sure that we look at how much money is going into the budget, how we're spending it in agencies and authorities, and only then we can talk about cuts and whether it's education or healthcare.
One of your colleagues, Senator Ruben Diaz Sr., actually put out a statement earlier this week saying he's coming to the special session, the lame duck session that will happen on November 29th, but he will not vote in favor of any cuts that he thinks is going to hurt his constituents, specifically the elderly. He's the head of the Senior Services Committee at this moment in the Senate. Do you think that you can make, now you won't be here for the lame duck session voting, you may be around in Albany, do you think you could make similar pronouncements, I will not vote for a budget that cuts, I don't know, progressive areas that you just discussed, that you think is where you should draw a line in the sand?
Well, I will always make a commitment to fight for the constituents that elected me to get up here. And the services that are provided to them, and not only the services, but when we're talking about healthcare and education, we're talking about a lot of people in my district work in both of these industries. And I want to make sure that I maintain their jobs as well as the services that are provided to my constituents.
But will you vote no on a budget that cuts those areas?
Well, I think that I'm committed to actually fighting to make sure that if the cuts are, I think that there's some cuts that are going to be necessary.
Right.
But when they happen, I think that we need to be smarter about the way that we do them. And I'm going to make sure that I fight to make sure that my constituents, whether they are working in these healthcare institutions or whether they are receiving services from them, or as far as education cuts, that they happen in a smarter way. But I am also looking forward to working along with my colleagues and with the Republican conference as well as the governor so that we can reorganize the entire budget process and do it in a smarter way. There's going to be pain. There's going to be pain, and it will be my job to make sure to advocate to my constituents and let them know that unfortunately some cuts are going to happen. But I don't know what those are going to be yet because we're not next year.
Right. The governor has said, the governor-elect, Andrew Cuomo, has said that he thinks that labor is largely part of the problem. He talks a lot about special interests, about reducing the amount of power that special interests in Albany have. There were some labor unions that didn't endorse him. I'm thinking in particular of the NICA, the teachers union. The public employees union, of course, are target number one, but some of what you're talking about, the Working Families Party agenda, is taxing the rich, closing the loopholes. I mean, do you agree with Andrew Cuomo? It sounds to me like you're going to be coming up against him when it comes to labor.
Well, I think that we have to actually sit down and have a conversation once we're in the actual budget process. I am not, one thing that you will never hear me do is to make some sort of total absolute statement when I still haven't seen what the situation is going to be like. There's certain things that I absolutely will stand for and that I will advocate for. But I think that to be able to get to any type of solution, to any type of resolution, there's actually some negotiation and back and forth that is necessary. So I will always be committed to my constituents. I will always be committed to minimizing the impact that any type of cuts have on the services that are provided to them. But I am not in the middle of the process yet. The budget hasn't come up. I haven't even been sworn in.
What about the property tax cap? Because that's something that the Working Families Party is not pro. Although they did sign on to Andrew Cuomo's new New York agenda, which of course includes the property tax cap in exchange for getting him to run on their line.
That's one that I haven't made a decision on yet.
Okay.
It's one of the many things that when we sit down today and when I sit down with some of my colleagues, particularly some of my more upstate colleagues, David Carlucci is actually one that since my district looks very different than the ones that he serves in or the ones that a lot of your listeners live in,
right.
That a lot of your viewers live in. I'm looking forward to actually learning a little bit more about what exactly that means and how exactly it would impact the entire budget process.
So you are headed now into a time when it's kind of in flux, the situation in terms of majority-minority. Regardless of that, will you be supporting John Sampson as leader of either conference, minority or majority, regardless of whether you end up?
Well, John Sampson is the leader right now of the Democratic Conference.
He is.
And we are still in the process of counting all the votes in these three races that are up, that are undecided. I feel confident that if we count all of the votes, I feel confident that the Democrats will be in the majority. It's not going to be pretty, and it's not going to be a quick process, but it is about the process. I'll remind yourself and your viewers, back in 2004, when Andrea Stewart Cousins ran against Nick Spano.
18 votes.
Correct, but on election night, she was down by 1,600 votes. But we went through the whole legal process because we had seen that there were a lot of irregularities and inconsistencies.
But how long
and eventually,
did it take?
It took to about, I believe, February,
right,
until the end of February.
Because, you know, this could, I mean, you see the governor-elect saying, I don't want this to take until February. I'd like this to be settled by the end of December. So I could go into January knowing somebody's in charge, and then I could get my agenda through. Do you agree with that sort of expedited, fast-track process that the governor-elect is pushing?
I believe that we need to look at the process very carefully, and that we need to make sure that every vote is counted.
So no.
That is I believe that every vote must be counted.
No matter how long it takes.
If somebody has actually participated in the process, I believe it is our responsibility to make sure that their vote is counted and let the chips fall where they may. But I do not want to go through the process. Do you know that back in 2004, again, when Andrea Stewart Cousins lost, and I put that in quotation marks because I believe that it got stolen from us when the process was stopped by the courts. One of the hundreds of ballots that remained unopened actually belonged to the communications director that she had back then. This is what I'm talking about. We need to make sure that we count all of the votes, that all the process, that we make sure that everything is done to the letter of the law, and I don't want it to be done slowly for the sake of being slow. I want it to be done correctly, and I want to make sure that every vote is counted.
Okay, unfortunately we're out of time, but I just wanted to clarify on one issue. John Sampson, yes. John Sampson, no, for you.
We have to figure out, we have to count all the votes to make sure whether we are in the majority or the minority conference, and then we will make the decision amongst the members.
So John Sampson, maybe.
He is the leader right now, and I'm looking forward to make sure that all the process that we undergo the whole process, that we count every vote, and we make sure that we know who is actually going to be in the majority and the minority.
Okay, well, it could take a while. Senator-elect Gustavo Rivera, I want to thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Albany.
Yes, ma'am.
Or welcome back, I should say.
Yes.